Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Hello, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome back to Modern Leadership, where weekly we sit down with experts and deep dive into topics that will make us more influential leaders and ultimately achieve the success buried within. I've been fascinated recently with team dynamics, particularly in the office environment. And today, I'm excited to introduce a father-son author team, Kelly and Robby Riggs. Kelly is a boomer. Robby is a millennial. They are coaches and experts in the field of workplace harmony. My words, not theirs. But this is really a bottom line conversation. The clash of perspectives, with boomers craving the comfort of hierarchical organization and millennials demanding inclusion and collaboration, is really impacting our bottom line. And we're talking about financials here, guys. But what I'm most excited to talk about is their research and writing in becoming people developers, coaches, motivators, and listeners. Their new book is Counter Mentor Leadership: How to Unlock the Potential of the 4G, Four-Generational Workplace. Kelly, Robby, welcome to Modern Leadership. How are you guys tonight?
Hey, we're doing great. Great to be with you.
I'm excited. You know, we're filming this for our audience. We're filming this at 8 o'clock on a Monday night, and I'm afraid we're cutting into the pop's bedtime. So, if he starts to fall asleep and you hear noise in the background, that's probably him just snoring, Jake. So we'll just have to, make a loud noise so he can wake up.
Hey, Jake, do me a favor. Well, do me a favor, Jake. Have Robby Google audio and help him understand there's a difference between audio only and film. He's struggling.
Well, these millennials, all they care about is what they can see. I mean, that's why YouTube is so popular, is it not?
Good point.
Well, I mean, I guess we millennials understand and know that the brain processes images 70 times faster than words. So we don't waste our time with inefficiencies, Jake. We jump right to what matters.
That explains all those little adorable emojis you guys do.
We've got 3 generations on this podcast here, and I got to tell you, I'm a little bit offended that your book focuses just on boomers and millennials. I feel like this Gen X generation, mine, right in the middle, is getting overlooked. But I think we're going to dive into that a little bit. But before we do that, Kelly, can you give us a little background of your business and how it came to be, how you guys got together?
Well, Robby and I, of course, father-son, he grew up in an entrepreneurial household. I've owned a number of companies and been in sales since I was a very young man myself. And I started an independent solopreneur consulting company a dozen years ago. And Robby actually interned with me as he was coming out of college. And he's got a big background in sales himself in interacting with me. And so after he got out of college, he started his big consulting career. He now owns a multi-million-dollar consulting firm on his own with a partner of his. So we have 2 separate companies, but a couple of years ago, we began to have a lot of conversations about a common interest that we saw from completely 2 different perspectives. And that was the clash of generations inside the workplace. And for boomers, they all want to know, how can we learn how to, quote unquote, manage millennials? And millennials want to know if boomers are ever going to get with a program. And the answer is we've got to change the freaking program. But so we started talking about those kinds of things. Eventually, that led to a podcast. And you can tell we get a little snarky and sarcastic. That eventually led to the book. And that led us to begin doing some very serious work together and working with clients and teaching them the methodology that we've created.
And so, Robby, if we take a step back and look at this kind of evolution that Kelly was talking about, you guys have your separate businesses. Now, are you in separate locations, or were you guys a pretty close family where you got together quite a bit?
Well, growing up, one thing that we will give a big shout out to my mother, who we, now that she's a grandmother, call her Nona. But she was adamant about being together and spending time together. And so that was something we learned at a very, very young age. And Pop's hit the nail on the head. I mean, as he was your classic 90s entrepreneur. I mean, it was a grind. It was a family business. My sister and I used to go in on Sundays, and we thought it was just to play, and we actually cleaned the office. And yes, he did pay us $20 whole a week. I'm just throwing that out there. He's been dominating and been way ahead of that practice before it got hip. But we spent a lot of time as a family running the business, and we didn't know it at the time, but mom and dad were actually doing the books, preparing for the week and all that in the family business. So it was really, really important to my mom, especially early on, that we spent time together. Now, as I left the house and I went and actually kind of went into big consulting, I've been away. The Pops is at the mothership there in Oklahoma. For the millennials listening, you'll have to Google Oklahoma and find where it's at on a map. But the Pops has been in Oklahoma throughout, and I've lived all over Dallas, St. Louis, Chicago, Boston, and now Philadelphia. So we have had to learn, especially in the book writing process, how to do a good job virtually and be great communicators over a huge distance. So it's definitely not something that I pop over on Sunday and we brainstorm. It's been something we've had to be intentional about and really have a lot of discipline around.
And so, Kelly, as you look at that process of working together over quite a big geographical distance, is that something that we could have done, or historically, like in the 80s, could that have happened? Or is it really technology that's allowed you to jump on, a Skype call and really talk with your son and really work together?
Oh, it is very much a function of technology. Back in the day, we would have been on our rotary dial phone, or if we were lucky, we would have had one of the push button princess phones on the wall, But it would have been tough to write a book and collaborate and revise documents. I mean, it would have been an extraordinarily time consuming process, surely. But technology allows so much collaboration now and allows us to collaborate in real time. We can do Skype, we can do video calls, we can use Google Docs and do all the integrations that come with that. So it made it a lot easier to span the geographical chasm that existed using all the technology that's available to us.
Well, and the reason I asked this, go ahead, Robby.
Sorry, I'm just my Google search right now is still loading rotary phone. I'm not sure what that is. So just give me about 5 so I can do a deep dive on Wikipedia.
It's in the dictionary, son, right after telegraph.
And when you look at this, the reason that I wanted to bring up this question is because I see this transition in business. And I know we're on this podcast to talk a little bit about workplace and collaboration and working together. But when you look at technology and the evolution of technology and what it's afforded us today, it's really allowed us to work across geographical boundaries. It's allowed us to be more remote. And we spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about having virtual offices or having people that can work from home and work from wherever they want. And so, Robby, as you look at, working across geographical distances, this probably comes pretty second nature to you, but how did you communicate with your father and get him up to speed?
No, it's such a great question. And you're right, it does come naturally because, and I'll remind all of our listeners that this is how my generation, the generation that's coming up behind me, the Gen Z, the digital natives, that's how we work. I mean, we didn't study at the library. We studied on the quad or at our apartment or in a different building on campus because Wi-Fi was everywhere. We were on laptops. This was very normal. We had group work and group activities that we all didn't meet together. We would jump on a Google Hangout and discuss group projects, especially when I was doing my graduate degree. We would do that over and over and over. So it's a very, very commonplace activity for my generation. And I think with Pops, and now I don't want him to listen to this, I'm actually going to pay him a compliment. It's going to get uncomfortable. But the Pops was actually ahead of his time on technology and leveraging different, social and other innovations to connect not only with customers, but with us as a family. So helping him getting engaged, Skype, FaceTime, that kind of stuff wasn't a huge learning curve. What was leveraging collaboration documents like Google Docs and Google Sheets, because that was something he just hadn't used in his time, especially obviously when it came to learning. So spending the time to walk him through what these are, how they work, how we can actually, edit one another's stuff in real time, that was a huge breakthrough. It actually allowed us to write the book really, really efficiently. And I guess, Jake, this is where I have to admit, I mean, I can't lie on this podcast. I wrote the entire book. The Pops just kind of hung out. Classic boomer. I did all the work. He's a millennial. He took a lot of credit. So I think we should go ahead and say that for our listeners.
Somebody's got to manage the process, Jake. That was me.
Well, and if you look at the book and the way you've laid out the book, I know that there's a baseball cap and there's a fedora in there that indicate where each of you participated in the quotables from the book. So, Kelly, I know that you spent a lot of time working on this book as well. We'll let Robby feel like he did a lot of it because he's used to getting the trophy and feeling like he did it all. But I wanted to ask you, Kelly, these stereotypes that are in the workforce, for you, it was you had something internal that allowed you to kind of accept this technology and kind of be an early adopter. But as a consultant, you're going into companies that are more traditional, more rigid, where the leadership is basically pushing against it or fighting it. And how do you communicate with a leader, a boomer, that's basically not like you, not an early adopter, but someone who's a late adopter saying, I don't want to accept this?
It's a challenge, Jake. I think it's one of the big challenges that we face. You know, it's interesting in corporate America, you see a widespread adoption going back to email and intranets and the things that existed in terms of making things easier in the workplace. You know, people have adopted that kind of technology. The other technology that they have not adapted nearly as well is the things that we've talked about. You know, we talk about collaboration tools, and we talk about social media and all the apps that are available. And depending on the size of the company and the who's listening in the audience, they may be screaming at the pod right now saying, no, wait a minute, we have video conferencing and we use it really varies across the board. As you mentioned, there is a small percentage of early adopters and widespread adopters, and there's a big broad middle of people who adopted, you know, certain parts of technology. But the reality is boomers grew up being successful a certain way, a very specific way. It was hard work, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you know, go out and make calls, see people, do things. And the whole notion that a generation of people are going to come along and tell us that what we're doing is ineffective or inefficient, and we can do it much quicker and much better. I mean, it's borderline offensive, especially for boomers, because they were taught that you are to give respect to your elders and to authority figures and those kinds of things. And so when a 20-something kid shows up and says, hey, listen, you need to get with a program, you're way behind the times, it does create some very significant rifts inside any organization. And it's not a millennial problem. We boomers want to make this a millennial problem. It's not a millennial problem. It's a change problem. And people just don't like to change. They struggle with new anything. Technology is just one of the big movers in the workplace, and that's what they're struggling against. So to answer your question, it takes some time and it takes some effort because people just simply don't like to change.
And Robby, as you hear that, and as I hear that, one of the things that I'm thinking about is this isn't a technology or a cultural change within the corporations and organizations that we work with, but it's really this creativity versus traditionalism argument where the baby boomers and Generation X, as we grew up in the workforce, we had this traditional mindset that we did A, then we did B, then we did C. Whereas millennials or the younger generation is now seeing, you know, we can do A, but then if we skip to D, we can shortcut the process. And I'm wondering if that's more a conversation of innovation and creativity versus traditionalism as opposed to, accepting the norms.
No, it's a great question. And I mean, I think it is actually very much in line with what the Pops is saying. This isn't a technology problem. Technology is, frankly, the enabler and what is causing this rapid transformation in the workplace. But you're exactly right. It's innovation. And it is the boomer generation traditionally holding on to the old way. You know, gone are the days of sit down, shut up, pay your dues, and in 15 years you can add value. Our generation is coming in going, are you freaking kidding me? I can do this in half the time and get it done so much faster. So there's a huge, huge opportunity here. And it really comes back to the mindset of the older generation. That's what we wrote Counter Mentor Leadership about. This generational conflict that's occurring in the workplace is actually not a generational problem. It is a leadership problem. We know, and we've seen it over and over and over, that when the boomer generation employs real leadership, real transformational leadership, they can move the needle in their organization from this traditional, staunch, slow, inefficient, yes, I'm using those words intentionally, to a young, new, innovative, better way of doing business.
And so I want to piggyback on what you just said, and I want to read a quote from the book, and I want to bring back some of our listeners who have maybe shut off because they don't think this applies to them. And the reason I want to bring this back is I want to talk about the bottom line and how what we're talking about here today isn't just making people feel good within the work environment. It's not just about giving people a happy place to come to work, you know, with the 40 to 50 to 60 hours a week that we're working. But this really affects our corporations, our company's bottom line. And so let me read a quote from the book. And then, Kelly, I want to get your take on how this applies to what we're talking about, the bottom line. So Here's the quote. You are giving away your company's money. Actually, to put a fine point on it, you're not really giving it to anyone. What you're doing is taking a significant amount of what your company earns every year and tossing it into the trash. Evidently, you take some kind of sadistic pleasure in taking a big pile of your company's money, dousing it in gasoline, and watching it burn. Hopefully, we've gotten your attention. You got my attention. As I read this, it jumped out to me, and I want to talk about the bottom line and how what we're talking about, the culture within a company, affects our bottom line.
There's a direct line from the welfare and engagement of employees to all of the metrics that business owners really care about, whether it's productivity, profitability, efficiency, safety, turnover, even employee theft, things like that. Every metric that we care about that impacts the bottom line or throughput and efficiency is impacted by how engaged employees are. We say engaged, we're not talking about skills, we're not talking about talents, we're talking about the level of passion and effort that people bring into a job. And I think intuitive, savvy leaders have known this forever, that when people care about what they're doing, they pay more attention, they go the extra mile, they're trying to do a better job. Howard Schultz of Starbucks said it simply. He said, we can't expect our employees to meet the expectations of our customers if we as leaders are unwilling to exceed the expectations of our own employees. And yet that's what a lot of leaders do. And it's counter to exactly what creates the most performance inside of an organization, because when people are disinterested and disengaged and not really trying to do their very best work, clearly I think you can see that there's a point at which that's got to impact performance. Well, luckily we don't have to guess, because there's several companies that have been measuring that performance for quite some time. Most notably, Gallup has been doing engagement surveys for 15 years now, I think it is, and they have the capacity to go in and see how engaged companies are. And Robby and I do this as well with our firm and our work as well. But we have the ability to see it. Now, the real interesting point, Jake, is what creates engagement. And luckily, we don't have to guess on that one either, because there's two very significant studies and both indicate the same thing. 70% of the time, engagement is a direct function of who you work for, your immediate manager or supervisor. So when we're talking about becoming better leaders, more effective leaders, and you create a culture of engagement, we're saying, look, you don't have to do it because you want to be altruistic. Do it because you're selfish if you want to, because it really does impact the bottom line and how effective your company is.
Well, and Robby, as you look at this, because the first thought that comes to my mind is, I like what Kelly's saying about getting people interested and engaged. And I agree with this Gallup poll that there's so much disengagement. The disengagement's leading to more sick time or more company theft or more surfing Facebook and doing all this instead of working. But is there a difference, or can we go too far by helping people to be not just engaged, but anarchy, where they can basically do what they want? We're so afraid to lose the millennial. We're so afraid to lose because they're disengaged that we allow them to do whatever they want.
No, it's a great question. I mean, who would want to lose employees that are from the greatest generation in the history of mankind? I mean, that'd be a terrible, terrible outcome for any organization.
I think Tom Brokaw would disagree with you on that one. I think the greatest generation is probably retiring.
So no, let's talk about it, because we are big believers, and we beat this up over and over and over. At some point in some place, there was this idea crafted, and it's now been propagated, and is a bold-faced lie, that the idea of accountability and building a relationship and leading someone are mutually exclusive. Quite the contrary. If you want to have engaged, highly productive, motivated employees, it is absolutely business critical that you set clear expectations and you hold those people accountable. We talk all the time, Jake, till we're blue in the face, that your organization's or your team's performance will normalize at the lowest common denominator. If you allow mediocrity, if you don't set great expectations and hold people accountable, allowing mediocrity, your entire team will slip and fall to that level of mediocrity. So no, if you want to keep millennials, give them value-added work and provide a sense of purpose. Set clear expectations. And then when they step outside of those expectations, hold them accountable, teach them, grow them. That's what millennials want. They don't want a babysitter. They don't want to be left on their own. They want to be coached and taught and groomed. And frankly, they want to do great things in an organization that is doing something more than the other organization down the street.
And I love what you just said there, and I think it bears repeating, and that is accountability is not counter to engagement. Engagement can still be a part of your organization with accountability. In fact, you're saying that accountability enhances engagement. And Kelly, I wanted to ask you this. Sometimes we work with these younger generations and we feel like we're dealing with teenagers. And I want to ask you how we deal with the emotions and the up and down, the swings. I have teenagers, and it seems like every time I try to teach them something, it ends in an argument or a complaint or the door slamming or somebody getting grounded. And how does that play out in our work environment where we as the boss, we as the leader, maybe an older generation, is looking at this younger generation and saying, look, you did this wrong. I need to hold you accountable to what we both expect from each other in this work environment without having the door slammed or a temper tantrum or them storming out because they're grounded.
Well, again, this is an excellent question and something that we run into quite often, because when you have a younger generation, a millennial, Gen Z coming into the workplace and they're dealing with a boomer, you're talking about completely different perspectives and worldviews and life experiences and what they value. And as Robby likes to point out, and it bugs me to agree with him, but it's true, when we complain about millennials, we have to look inwardly, because after all, who raised them? We raised them in an environment where we did not allow them to fail. We did not allow them to face consequences. Again, I'm speaking generally, and I know that there are many millennials out there, especially older millennials like my son, who may have got quite a bit more accountability at home than others. But typically, these generalizations are here because they're generally true. And so they come into the workplace, and you've got this real clash of ideals. And there's a whole lot of things that have to happen, Jake, in order to remedy this situation. But the most significant one is the idea of very, very clear expectations. And it has to start in the pre-hiring process. When you're doing interviews, you have to get on the same page. And the only way to do that is to bring up some of these differences and set the expectation that this is the kind of people we are. This is the way we do things. This is what we're going to ask you to do. And we would like for you to agree and commit to that and get on board before you ever accept the job, because we're going to have conflict as a result. I mean, very simply, conflict is nothing more than frustrated expectations. I expected one thing, but I got something quite different. But there's one piece of expectations that'll really help people. And we find it to be inordinately successful in terms of moving the needle between two very different perspectives. And that is this: my generation, boomers, we grew up when we asked a question of our parents or of authority figures, when we were young, we asked why. They would say, because I said so. And that runs so counter to human psychology, it creates some real problems. Explaining the why behind decisions, behind policy, and behind expectations is critically important, especially with millennials, because they have always been explained to. They've always been told why we're doing things and why things are happening. And then they run, face to face into a boomer manager, and he says, here's what I want you to do. And they say, why? And they look at you like you've lost your mind. Like, what do you mean, why? Just do it because I said so. I'm your boss. And that is an awful way to get a working relationship started with someone from a younger generation. Real key point. When you explain your expectations, explain the why behind it. People do better work when they understand why you're asking them to do it.
Well, yeah, and Pops, Jake, let's double click on that, because this is such an important point. And it's not like Gen X or boomers, when they were young in their career, liked that either. The difference is the millennial generation has two things going for them. Number one, we have, as Pops alluded to, we were raised in an environment where when we said, no, we don't want to do this, or why do we have to do this, someone typically gave us an answer, or they just ignored us and didn't push us, that whole, no accountability thing. But the other side of this coin is that if Pops was irritated at a boss, what was he going to do? Go to his typewriter and type up a cover letter? I mean, come on. It was going to take him a week to do that. He probably would have messed up, would have had to start over. Then he had to put it in the mail, lick a stamp and put it on the letter, send it to the place. 4 weeks later, I mean, it's this ridiculous process. When you do that to the millennial generation, when we get frustrated, or you're going to tell me because I said so, and the stereotypical millennial is going to roll their eyes and on their lunch break, jump on LinkedIn, apply for 5 jobs, have 3 interviews set up by the end of the week, and then accept a job on Monday. I mean, the idea of our environment plus the accessibility created by technology has given us the ability to say, no, I'm not going to take it.
Well, it's interesting. As I listen to you there, I see the pendulum swinging both ways from what Kelly said to what Robby said. And that is, we've got these millennials that are doing a good job. We want to hold them accountable, but we want them to stay. I mean, they're making an impact. And then, Robby, your response is, look, a millennial's just going to leave if you don't treat them well. And I'm having a hard time bringing the two of those thoughts together because I don't want my millennials to leave. And I recognize that they can, but I also don't want to give them free reign of the place and let them do whatever they want just so they'll stay.
I'll jump in there, Jake, because I think I understand that and hear it a lot as a boomer consultant. I mean, quite frankly, many of our clients will say, listen, if you're trying to tell me I'm going to have to coddle these kids and I'm going to have to hold their hand and babysit them and I'm going to have to let them run the show and I'm going to have to put in video games, I'm out. I'm not doing that. And we say, look, you're missing it completely. That's not what we're saying. All millennials are asking for is very, very simply is a reason to exist, a purpose, and doing meaningful work. They want to be valued for the contributions that they make, and they want to get consistent feedback that allows them to grow and develop their career. That's what we mean when we say treat them well. We're not talking about coddling or trophies or any of the sort of stereotypical
Blue Jean Fridays.
Yeah, Blue Jean Fridays and all that, new coffee in the break room and all that. There may be a place for some of that stuff. What Robby and I are talking about, though, is we're talking about effective leadership. Because here's what happens, Jake. When someone of any generation believes that their boss cares about them and is willing to help them grow their career, develop their skills, and transform their potential into real performance, it creates an unbreakable bond of engagement. And when it's genuine, when it's authentic, and we really care about people, it takes a lot of work to be an effective leader, but it has a tremendous impact on engagement. It has absolutely nothing to do with, coddling or let people run the show or anything else.
And I absolutely agree. And I think it goes back to what you said a little bit earlier, and that is with the hiring process, your pre-hiring process. It's clearly understanding what you're trying to find in an applicant, what you want them to do, and then be able to bring them on board. The onboarding process is so important. It's not about coddling. It's about preparing. It's about taking your time. And one of the things that I stress all the time on this podcast is hire slow. Make sure you're bringing on the right people. And there's some things that can be taught. When I'm doing a lot of hiring, I know I can teach a lot of the skills on the job, but there's some things that can't be taught. That's the accountability. That's the drive. That's the passion. That's the willingness to step outside of their comfort zone and do the job as needs to be done to have success. Those things can't be taught. And so when I go through a hiring process, I take the extra amount of time to make sure that I find somebody that has those intangibles, because I can teach anything else, all the skills. What do you say about that, Robby?
No, I think you're spot on. And what the Pops just alluded to, the monologue that he went on, that is exactly where he and I had our aha moment. Because we were arguing back and forth about, quote unquote, the millennial problem. And we realized that we were actually saying the exact same thing from very different ways. And, when you talk about how you hire and hiring the right people, the talent identification process, Jake, we couldn't be more aligned. I can teach you anything if you're willing to learn. I can help you grow and get better if you're willing to put in the hard work. If you have that grit that Duckworth talks about, that coming together, desire and discipline. If you possess that as part of your being, I can teach you anything. And that's what I stress so, directly with millennials as they're coming into the workplace. And now with Gen Z, as they begin to invade as well, is that is what is going to set you apart. Okay. You're not going to be Mark Zuckerberg. You're not going to be Larry Page. You're not going to be, if you want to be successful and have a great career and travel the world and live the 4-hour work week and all that stuff that as millennials we hear on podcasts all the time, if you want to do that, those are the characteristics that you have to have on a daily basis. You have to be committed to learning and committed to working hard. And if you do those two things, truly, I believe in today's gig economy and what we're doing, the upside is tremendous, and the ability to create an incredible lifestyle that you're going to be happy to share on Instagram and Snapchat is absolutely within your reach.
And so if we look at historically hiring, we hired people that had skills or background or a certain educational stature, and that's who we brought onto our teams. The employment of the future is really going to depend on this desire to learn and grow, to be teachable, and to acquire the skills necessary at the time. One of the statistics that talks about this next generation after millennials, they're going to be hitting the workforce here coming up not too long from now. And most of the jobs that they're going to get don't even exist today. They can't learn today what needs to be done in the future because it doesn't exist yet. But those intangible skills of desire, teachableness, accountability, going after your passion are things that they can learn today, which will make them invaluable moving forward. And I think that's what's going to separate those who are in demand and those who really can't find work moving into the future. Now, Kelly, before we let you guys jump off the podcast today, I want to switch gears just a little bit, bring a little personal to go with this business discussion, ask you guys a couple of questions about what you're reading or what you're watching. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. Well, first question, then we'll go towards Kelly. Book currently on your Kindle or bedside table?
Pops, you still there? I think we might have lost you. You might have fallen asleep, Jake. I warned you about this.
He fell right asleep. So same question back to you, Robby. What are you reading these days?
Man, it's a great question. I actually have two books that I'm right in the middle of. I actually get this from the Pop since he's not on the pod to defend himself. I will. I'll give him some grief. Growing up, he was always reading 3 or 4 or 5 books at a time. I've never seen anyone else in my professional or personal life that consumes more content than the Pops, and which I will say I believe is the number one driver of success, by the way. And so he instilled that in me. So actually, I'm reading 2 great books right now. First one I'm reading is called Shake Hands with the Devil. It's by the general who actually was responsible for the UN mission to Rwanda whenever the Rwanda crisis happened. And man, it was something that I wanted to read personally. I'm actually going to Africa in April, and so I wanted to learn about the culture I was walking into. And I have learned more great leadership lessons from him. It's been outstanding. So that's the first one. The other one is I'm actually reading a book called one of the really famous books, On Death and Dying, by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, really looking to learn more about how we help people through change, of course, using death as the allegory here. So a couple of great books that I'm really enjoying.
And one of the reasons that I love to ask this question is there are so many books out there, and I'd love to get perspective of why leaders today are reading what they're reading, what's drawing them in a direction and what they're putting on their nightstand, because there's so much competition. And so I love those thoughts. Next question then would have to be, do you have a motivational quote, mantra, or philosophy that you live by?
Well, I'm back on the pod now, so I don't know where I went there. I could hear you, but you couldn't hear me. My apologies.
We thought you fell asleep, Kelly. It's okay.
It is past my bedtime, Jake. But no, I wanted to answer the question about reading the books, and thanks to Robby for talking about consuming content, because I think the mantra for me to answer both questions at once is very simple, is that leaders are learners. I don't think that you can ever remain a great leader without the capacity to adapt. And one of the things in our research, Jake, that we have found is what the one constant, there are 3 or 4, but one of the constants among great leaders is that they're constantly adapting to change. And if you can't find the capacity to adapt, then I think that you're, as Robby likes to say, you're rapidly going to become irrelevant. There's a couple of books that I'm reading now, and I just sort of get interested in things, but I learn things out of them. The one I'm reading now is called The Spider Network: The Wild Story of a Math Genius, a Gang of Backstabbing Bankers, and one of the greatest scams in financial history. And it's just been really interesting to read that book and take what has come out of it. The other one I'm reading is something called The Captain Class. And it's a really interesting book. It's called The Hidden Force That Creates the World's Greatest Teams, written by Sam Walker. And it's about not the generals, but the captains that support those generals, the second in command that typically are the glue that hold things together. But to answer your question about mantra, I think that every successful person is someone who's not only coachable, but they are driven internally to be learners. I think they're always striving to grow and adapt to what's coming at them.
Yeah, and Jake, let me pile on there, because I am unashamedly a diehard New England Patriots sports fan, a Boston sports fan in general,
and living in Philadelphia, by the way.
It has not been a good past 4 weeks for me. Anyway, I've been recently watching, as I know many people have on Facebook Watch, Tom versus Time, and in the opening episode of Tom versus Time, Tom Brady said something that I wrote down, starred, highlighted, and tweeted all at the same time. He says, what are you willing to do and what are you willing to give up to be your best? And I think when I think about motivational quotes or mantras, that just hit me at the right time, in the right moment, that I remember telling my wife afterward, I'm like, that's it. What am I willing to do? But more importantly, what am I willing to give up? Bad habits, being lazy, sleeping in, not making my bed, all those things that we talk about from a discipline perspective. Not only what are you willing to do, but what are you willing to give up to be your best version of yourself?
Boom. I love it. I think that's the best place to cut this podcast because I really like what you're saying. What are we willing to give up to reach our best selves? Because it's not going to come easy. You have to give something up. You have to sacrifice something to reach the pinnacle of success. Now, Robby, Kelly, so appreciate you guys coming on the podcast. Before I let you guys go, how can we learn more about you? How can we pick up a copy of this book?
Countermentors.com is where you can find us. We created that particular website not only to host our podcast, our video podcast, where we like to be, I know this is a shock, Jake, but we like to be sarcastic and snarky. And when we wrote the book, Yeah, Robby said the main thing about writing the book is we don't want to write another boring leadership book. I mean, there are so many good leadership books out, and then there's hundreds and hundreds more. We wanted to write something that was a little bit different and a little more engaging in that process. So you can find both our podcast and our book there at countermentors.com. Of course, you can buy the book there, or you can buy it on Amazon. You can Google us and Google the book and find it on Amazon.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that I picked up a copy of the book and read through it, and it is not written like a traditional business book. There is plenty of snarky, there's plenty of witty humor, and it's a fun read, but it's also a big book. I mean, it's nearly 400 pages of research that you guys did to put this together. Kelly, Robby, thank you so much for being guests on the Modern Leadership Podcast. I cannot thank you enough.
You bet. Great
Thanks
to
so
be
much,
with you.
Jake.
All right, my friends, what a fun episode of the podcast. Sure enjoyed having Kelly and Robby, the father-son author duo, come on and talk about their book, talk about millennials in the workforce and boomers in the workforce, and really how we can find that harmony working together. I think we dived into a lot of topics that are near and dear to my heart right now because I really look at what the new generation coming into the workforce is bringing, the traits, the skills, the qualities, the leadership that they have. And I don't want them to be stifled, but I don't want them to run rampant. I don't want them to run anarchy, but I want them to really join together with the team and move forward. And so I think we talked about some really neat topics on engaging millennials within the workforce. Of course, everything that we talked about, including the recommendations of the books that we talked about, can be found on the show notes for this episode, which is at jakeacarlson.com/ML60, Modern Leadership 60. And there you can get everything, including how to connect with Robby and Kelly and pick up a copy of their book. Until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life, and of course, stay awesome. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.